Okay, we have 43 people in the webinar at the moment, so it seems that a few more had joined. Now let's start today's webinar. And as mentioned, the title of today's webinar is the Reduced Golden Visa option, which is one of the most popular programs across EU for golden visas, because it allows anyone to invest and get citizenship with just 280,000 euros. In today's webinar, you have me. I'm the sales manager of Rocio Palace, which is an example of such a reduced golden visa project. And with me today, I have Philippe Leal. He is a civil engineer and former McKinsey consultant, and also a property developer. And he is going to share his experience being in the property market in Portugal and specifically developing a golden visa project like Rocio Palace. He's the project manager of Rocio Palace. So the agenda of today consists of 3 topics. We have the first topic, which is what makes the reduced golden visa so popular. And the second topic is why is the golden visa opportunity ending in Portugal? There has been some rumors. We're going to see which ones are going to stay strong, or which one are going to be may not be the truth. And finally, we have the third point, which is Rocio Palace. It's a dream coming true. It's a project that has involved a lot of different people in developing the project, the architecture, the interior design. And we are going to look at what makes that a unique golden visa project, because often people associate something being cheap with being less high quality. But in this example, it's actually the opposite. You're buying a reduced golden visa project, but you're getting a very high quality project for your money. And finally, we are going to have the Q&A. So if you have any questions you would like to have answered, you could send it before the webinar, as many of you already have done. And you can also send it in the chat. And then afterwards, we are going to have a Q&A session where all the questions will be answered. However, we have a limit to time. So if we cannot answer all the questions, we are going to send the answers by mail to all of you after the webinar. So let's get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Mathilde, and welcome everybody. So we are going to have 3 topics, as Mathilde mentioned. Let's start with the reduced golden visa, and 2 questions in that regard. A reflection on what makes it so attractive, so interesting, so captivating. And another one, is it ending? Is the golden period for the golden visa coming to an end? First of all, Portugal is a very sought after country these days, and it has been for a few years. On the one hand, that is due to the tourism. It has been booming in Portugal as never before. Tourism has always been an important part of the Portuguese economy. It represents around 20% of the GDP, so very substantial. But in the previous years, Portugal has become more than ever at the forefront. For example, Portugal has won for 4 consecutive years the World's Travel Awards as the best destination in Europe. And of course, this resulted in a massive inflow of tourists to Portugal. On the other hand, we also have the very interesting and highly sought after Portuguese golden visa, which is the most popular investment program in Europe. And the reason for this is not just the cost. It is the most cost-effective solution to get access to citizenship in Portugal and in the EU. It is also a visa that doesn't require a relocation. It doesn't require the investors to live and stay permanently in the country for an extended period of time. So because of these criteria, it is indeed the most competitive offer out there. And that's good, but it's also a challenge, because by virtue of being so highly sought after, and by virtue of being more competitive than other golden visa programs in Italy, in Greece, in Spain, there is pressure from the European Union to harmonize the golden visa rules. And that means that the rules right now in Portugal, which are very favorable, they ought sooner or later to come to an equal level, on par with the other European countries. So that is one type of pressure right now that is on the golden visa, pressure for harmonization. But there's another pressure as well. The golden visa has brought an immense amount of funds of investment into Portugal, into the real estate market. More than 7 billion euros have been invested in property. And that has resulted or contributed to a very substantial increase in the real estate prices, and in particular in the housing prices. And this trend of rising prices for housing is continuing and is stronger than ever. This year, so far, the market is up 12% compared to last year, and it has been like that for the last 5-6 years. And this is because there's growing demand from tourists, from investors, and there's not that much supply. There is a bottleneck in supply, and there's many reasons for that. One of those reasons is the time it takes to get things licensed in Portugal. A licensing takes anything from 1 to 3, 4, or even 5 years. That's just the bureaucracy that still exists in the country. But this increase in the prices has meant that the locals, the people that live in the cities and in different regions in Portugal, have felt that increase and have not been able to follow up because their purchasing power doesn't allow them. And because of that, there has been pressure on the government. There has been dissatisfaction to change some of those rules. And indeed, there was a change. It entered in effect this year. In order to cool down the market, in order to try to contain the increase in prices, the government approved changes to the rules. And that was approved more than 1 year ago, and they came into effect this year. And those rules don't allow any more residential investments in the big cities, in Lisbon, in Porto, and in others. And this is to help or to try to cool down the market. So the goal of this rule is to make the investment flow more to the interior of the country, to other regions. Of course, this has led to a boom now in the other parts of the country. And so much so that recently, the Prime Minister made a statement amidst this very hot market. And this statement was made when he was speaking at the Web Summit, or after he spoke at the Web Summit. The journalists came to him, to Antonio Costa, that's his name, and asked him about a new program he had created for digital nomads, where they can spend a year in the country. And as he was talking about that program, he mentioned that the Golden Visa program would probably come to an end, because probably it had already fulfilled its purpose. Those were his words. And of course, those words sent a bit of shockwaves in through the industry, because people were trying to decipher, what does he mean by that? Does that mean that the Golden Visa could end already next year? Does it mean that it could end 1 year from now, 2 years from now? Of course, we don't have the definitive answer, but we do have some insider information that helps shed light into this situation and what will happen. How will the situation unfold? So one thing is certain, due to the pressure from the EU for harmonization, sooner or later, the reduced Golden Visa, at least, is very likely to end. But probably only in 2024. And let me explain why. So first of all, the Prime Minister mentioned that the Golden Visa, the regime, would have to be assessed. And indeed, a week after his announcement on the 9th of November, the Minister for Economy in Portugal, he mentioned, to corroborate the words of the Prime Minister, that a new work group was going to be established. And the purpose of that work group was to determine or to assess the impact of the reduced Golden Visa, and to determine if it was good or not for the country to have such a low bar for citizenship. Establishing a work group means that it has to be established, work has to be done, a conclusion needs to be reached and discussed, and then a decision needs to be made. That's why it's very unlikely that, as of now, a decision would be made without this work group's work being complete. Now, a few of the political parties in the parliament have proposed to the government that the Golden Visa would be already cancelled, the reduced Golden Visa would be cancelled already next year, already in January. And they put a proposal forward in the budget that is being discussed right now. However, it may seem that 3 or 4 parties that submitted this proposal is a lot, but it's not. Those are the very small parties of 1 representative in the parliament. So in total, they have less than 4% of the votes. And by the way, the prime minister doesn't need any votes because he has majority in parliament. He can get anything he wants approved. And the biggest parties have not submitted any proposal regarding golden visa. So there is a little bit of noise in the market, and it's not the first time it happens. So there has been proposals from these small parties to stop the golden visa for several years, and they have been always rejected. So the bottom line of this, the conclusion is it going to end the reduced golden visa opportunity? Yes. Is that end imminent and as imminent as already next year? No. Even in the unlikely event where the government would decide to cancel the reduced golden visa, it would take several months to have a deadline for that to be implemented. For example, when the government changed the legislation to stop the golden visa in residential property in the big cities, it first took 6 years. The government gave a 6-month period for that to come into play, and then extended another 6 years. So in reality, after the decision was made, it took 12 months for that decision to come into effect. So even if anything would be decided right now as the budget is being discussed, and by the way, the voting for the budget is happening on the 25th. So on the 25th, we will know for sure what will happen. But even if that were to happen, there would be a time in the market. So the conclusion is it's a time-bound opportunity. It's not going to be there forever, but probably there's a 1-year window of opportunity. And that sums up some reflections on the golden visa, the appeal it has on international investors that want to have the EU citizenship, and what is going on in the legislative environment as well in the country. Now I will share with you Rocio Palace, which is a reduced golden visa opportunity that is very exciting. And it has been in the market for a short period, but is selling very fast. And let me tell you an overview of, on the one hand, the Rocio Palace project, the property and the project, and on the other hand, the investment. What is the case for this investment? What makes it unique? And what is the process to make that investment and qualify for the reduced golden visa opportunity? So let's start with the property. And to start with the property, let me take you to a region of Portugal called Alentejo, which is in between the South Algarve and Lisbon in the center of the country. This region is known for its very beautiful and in many cases untouched nature, which you can't find these days very often. It's also known for the medieval landscapes, the cities, the villages, the churches, the castles. And it's considered the next frontier of tourism in Portugal because it is now blossoming. And also, not just internally inside Portugal, but very much it has raised in prominence internationally. For example, Time elected it as one of the 50 greatest places of 2022 to discover, one of the 50 extraordinary destinations to explore. That was on the, of course, very famous Time magazine. And as a result of this increased recognition, both internally and externally, Alentejo has seen a very substantial increase in the number of tourists. Let me share some statistics with you from the National Statistics Bureau of Portugal. So from 2014 until now, how has the number of guests visiting Alentejo evolved? It has increased steadily. Since 2014 until 2019, in 2019, it surpassed 1.5 million. So a very robust growth rate of around 10% every year. Then, of course, we all know what happened. 2019 came and it brought the pandemic. And with the pandemic, very strict lockdown measures. So in 2020, there was an abrupt decrease in tourism because people in Portugal could not move from one municipality to another. And of course, there were no more tourists arriving to Portugal. The situation persisted in 2021. Towards the end, there was a rebound because the country started opening up again and the restrictions started being lifted. And in 2022, where there are no more restrictions in place, the tourism has regained its momentum, and it's going to be, or it's predicted to be, based on the numbers so far, the strongest year in tourism for Alentejo region. Now, the region, besides this increased demand from tourists, it's also the region in Portugal that is known as the highest quality of life in the country. And because there's every year a study made by Marktest that goes into all the municipalities in Portugal, 308, and creates a score of the quality of living based on different factors, such as the pollution, security, cost of living, etc., a series of factors. And every single year, the region in Alentejo comes down on top. And among those 308 municipalities in Portugal, Castelo de Vide, which is where Rocio Palace is located, comes as the municipality on top of the list. And one of the reasons for that is because it is surrounded by a beautiful natural park, the natural park of São Mamede. And Rocio Palace is located in a medieval village that is inside that park. And that park is the one with the most biodiversity in Portugal. So it is, of course, a very strong attractive for this region. But it's not only the natural park that contributes to this and also the increase in people coming to the region. Besides tourism, the region is also seeing an increase in people who come there to establish themselves, to establish their lives. Lives in the city often becomes stressful, there's pollution, high costs, so people start moving to those more interior areas of the country, and some of them work remotely and can establish a very good life there and still come to the city whenever they want, because Portugal is very well connected with highways from north to south of the country. So they're never too far from a bigger city like Lisbon, Porto, or Faro in the south. And of course, that's the region, as I mentioned before, is famous for its castles. And that's a big landmark, if you will, of it. Heritage places, archaeological sites, medieval villages and castles, such as Castelo de Vide, where the municipality in the Palacete is, Nisa, Marvão, etc. Those are very known places and are captivating more and more visitors to come there and see those very unique places. And of course, being in a natural environment, there's also plenty to offer in terms of nature tourism, from hikes in the forests, the hills, horseback riding, trekking. There's plenty on offer. And also very close to Rocio Palace, there's a big lake, which also offers the possibility for a swim, fishing, kayaking, etc. Now, some of you may know Alentejo also from its wines, because it is the largest region in Portugal producing wines. Of course, the most famous wines in Portugal are the Porto wine produced in the north, but the Alentejo, in terms of size, is the biggest producer. Mostly red wines, but also green and white wines. It's also known as the Tuscany of Portugal because of that strong association with wine. And it's in fact one of the very few regions where they still use a traditional method of producing wine used by the Romans, where they use ceramic tiles to produce it. So wine is another key factor aside the gastronomy of the region. And one final note of a new development in the region, which is this year, a fund bought a large golf course very close to Rocio Palace to invest in a major refitting and upgrading of that golfing infrastructure. So very soon, there will be a very nice golfing facility in the area, which is the only golfing facility there. So it's a very exciting development as well. Now, how do you reach this paradise? So this paradise is located close to the Spanish border. It's 2 hours from Lisbon, and it's just 20 minutes from the Spanish border. So there are several ways to get there by plane, and because it's so close to Spain, it's also possible to fly to Spain and then cross the border. There are basically no borders because it's EU. So to cross the border to Portugal and reach Rocio Palace. For example, the closest airport is in Badajoz. That's 1 hour and 20 minutes away. All right, so this is this little paradise of Alentejo, and in particular, Castelo de Vide with its nature, its history. Now, let me share with you Rocio Palace, the property. What is this property and what makes it so unique? Rocio Palace is like a fairy tale palace. It is in a very good position at the center of the medieval village. And it used to be the residency of a wealthy family in that region, a family that has ties with Brazil. They came from Brazil, and then the King of Portugal granted them vast amounts of land in the region. So they were the big landowners there. And the facade of the palace with its rich ornaments is a testimony to their power and their wealth. In this picture, you can see on the left, the palace as it is today, and a picture on the right with the inside of the palace with very high ceilings, stucco on the ceilings, nice details and wood floors, etc. And it is in a very good conservation state. A study was made by Encraft, that's an engineering company that did the structural engineering project. And the diagnostic of the building is very good. Of course, it needs reinforcing on the structures to improve the standards of acoustics, flexibility, etc. But it is in a very good standard. And the Rocio Palace is a strong identity for the region. It's part of that heritage. Every time there is a celebration in the area, the backdrop is Rocio Palace, as you see here on this picture, where there was a commemoration of the Independence Day, and the parade is there in this main plaza with Rocio Palace on the background. And it's also has been featured a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic. TV series was recorded there inside Rocio Palace. The series is called O Nosso Cônsul, and it is displayed on TV, on national television. So it also gave some prominence to the region. And then a final note, a few paintings, so you get a feeling of the idyllic environments that we are in this. It seems a place that got a little bit stuck in time, where things still are as they were 100 years ago. So you see here a painting where the palace is in this plaza. Next to it, a very old church dating from the Templars. And then on the right, another view from the palace and one of the roads in this village. So it's a place that is not just charming, but also filled with history. And inside Rocio Palace, there are plenty of symbols of that history, from old memorabilia, old photos, and also photos taken of the village many years ago. Some of them we don't know when, but long time ago. For example, on the right, you can see a bullfight happening, and Rocio Palace again on the backdrop. Now, the palace is the symbol of the property, but the property contains more than the palace. It contains also a series of gardens and dependency buildings, which are not in such a good state, and those need a full rehabilitation. You can see here some of those buildings, and they were used to house the servants, the animals, to produce olive oil, to produce wine. I want to point out one thing that caught my attention since the very beginning, and that is the beautiful Portuguese tiles, hand-painted. This is a picture from the olive oil, the old olive oil mill, which is not functioning at the moment. It still has the machinery, but that's just archaeological industrial machinery. It's not producing olive oil at the moment, but it has that machinery, and it has the beautiful hand-painted tiles all around. And you can see a detail of how nicely done they are. It's very hard to get these done today. So this was an overview of Rocio Palace, the property. Now, what is the project? The project in this property is to convert it into a deluxe hotel and do it in a way where it's co-owned by a series of investors. And this project qualifies for the reduced golden visa. So what will it contain? On the left, you can see a map of the property. The palace is the building at the very top. And then there's a series of gardens, pools, apartments, spa, bars, restaurants, series of facilities inside the property. And it's possible to develop these facilities because the constructed area exists today. Otherwise, it would not be possible. It's not possible to add construction area, especially in a preserved area, which is the area of the park. But because the construction exists, it can be reused, readapted to different purposes. So there's a series of facilities that are being developed, shared facilities and private facilities, both in the palace and in all the dependencies. And then, of course, there's all that the region has to offer. So Rocio Palace is also a platform to get to know and explore the region. And here is a picture taken from the plaza, Rocio Plaza, where you can see a simulated tower built on top of Rocio Palace. And that is an observation tower that is being added into the palace. And here you can see it from a different angle, the architectural drawings of that beautiful observation tower. And because the village is only 2 stories high, from that tower, you get the most, or you will get the most impressive view, because you'll be able to see the whole village and the surrounding natural park. So now let me share with you a little glimpse of how the palace looks today and how it will look after the rehabilitation project. Here's a photo of the entrance as it is today. After the rehabilitation, it will be pretty similar, but of course with a few details added and a bit more comfort level. Here's a view of a corridor. After the renovation, again, higher level of details. The woods, which are dark, will be lightened up and painted to give it a more modern and more luxury feeling. Here, another view of a corridor in a similar fashion. Carpet on the floors, a nice parquet, wood panels painted white on the walls, and then the stucco on the ceilings and some nice paintings around the corridors. Now let me take you to a few of the areas inside the palace. You may notice that the design has a Nordic touch, and that's because the designer is a Nordic designer, a famous Nordic designer called Nadia Lassen. She is the one that did the interior project. And for example, here in the lobby, you can see that there's a more rustic feeling with the stone pavement, the dark painted walls, and the hand-painted towels all around in the walls. Now let's go into the lounge. Here we have a very comfortable lounge that opens up to the outside, to the gardens, and allows access to the dependencies. And on the walls, on the right side of you may see looks like a grass, but it's actually moss from the natural park. The moss grows in the natural park, and it can only grow where the air quality is very, very good. And it is going to be used in the decoration. Now we'll look into the restaurant. Here's a view of the restaurant, very high ceilings, a very nice environment. This is a common area. There's also a private dining room. Now an example of a room. Here's a room. Besides the very nice details and finishing and nice quality materials with wood, stone on the backsplash, quartzite stone. So all these nice details, beautiful lamps from a Danish brand as well. There's also a kitchenette with 3 modules that allows for an easy making of a simple meal if needed. And finally, let's go to the very top of the palace and look at the Miradoro, which is the observation point that I mentioned, where one can observe beautiful views from the surrounding village and natural park. So this is the project, and I focused on the palace to give you an idea of how it will be the look and feel once the renovation is completed. The timeline is to start in Q1 next year, and then the construction will last until the end of 2024. So as the construction progresses, the operation agreement will be finalized and decided, and then there are 6 months of finishing to get all the furnishing and all the equipment in place for the opening in the beginning of 2025. Even though the opening is still more than 2 years away, the marketing has already begun. And I will tell you more about that in a minute. So now that we covered Rocio Palace, the property, and Rocio Palace, the project, let's look into the investment. So what is the investment case of Rocio Palace? Rocio Palace is a 3-in-1 investment. So first, there is the property. It's a co-ownership in an urban palace. So all the investors become owners in that real estate property. The second feature is a business. It's not just a real estate asset. There is a business, a hotel business operating on that asset. And the investors get a yield from the hotel operations. And then there is also an exit strategy, which will be triggered in year 6. So after 5 years of the process for the Golden Visa, the exit strategy will kick in and will allow investors to cash out of their investment. And then the third aspect of it is, of course, the golden visa and the possibility of getting the golden visa at the reduced amount of 280,000 instead of 350 or 500. So let me share a few more details about the investment. So the investment in Rocio Palace is 280,000, which qualifies for the reduced golden visa. And on top of that, there is an added benefit, which is normally when you buy a real estate property in Portugal, you have to pay IMT. You have to pay stamp duty and you have to pay IMT. Stamp duty is 0.8%. It's not very high, but IMT is quite high. It's around 6.5%. So it's a substantial cost. In Rocio Palace, because of it being a rehabilitation, we are offering that IMT payment. So the developer is supporting that cost. The investors don't need to pay it. And that is a very interesting benefit, which doesn't apply to other projects which are not rehabilitation. The assets underlying the investment is a deluxe hotel, which is going to be developed from the first quarter of next year and then take 2 years in construction with the Danish design. The architecture is Portuguese, but the furnishing and the interior design is Nordic. And the reason for that is that the target audience is mostly in the Nordics, and I will get there in a minute. It is a location is urban, it's in the village, it's urban land and urban construction with 50 rooms, 45 apartments and 50 rooms that can be rented out. The yield from the hotel operations of those 50 rooms is 4 to 6%, and that depends on the occupancy. And I will mention more about that in a minute. The exit is after 5 years. Once the investors have their successful golden visa applications, then the property is sold as one unit. So all the investors are forced to cash out so that the unit can be sold in one. The refurbishment, as I mentioned, starts in 2023, in the first quarter, and the operation starts 2 years after, in the first quarter of 2025. So a few more, let me shed some light on the business case and the revenue and cost. So the revenue is, of course, when the hotel opens, a little bit lower as the occupancy is being built. And then when it reaches maturity, the revenue is expected to surpass 4 million euros. And I will share with you what is the basis for these numbers. So the average rate is 250 and the occupancy 75%. And to give you a sense of how is the market in the region, let me share a few examples. And one of them is noteworthy. It's called São Lourenço. It's close to Rocio Palace, or at least not very far, less than an hour. And this property, this hotel, fetches 800 euros a night. And you may think, how come? It looks pretty simple. It looks like just a farmhouse. And it does. It's a rather modest hotel. But it's a very interesting concept because they managed to develop an experience for their guests. And this is what the guests say about the hotel. Absolutely beautiful, quiet, peaceful. Staff are exceptional. Every detail was perfect. So as you can see, it's not even that fancy, but it commands a very high price. And that's because the experience that they managed to develop inside the property. And this is what the market rewards. It's the experiences. And there's several other examples of properties that have developed based on experiences. For example, the experience of living in an old convent, Posada do Convento de Évora. That one costs 360 euros a night. Mora Suits Hotel. This one is a little bit more upscale. They have some very nice suites with stucco ceilings and some nice comfortable beds and couches, 350. So in the region, the price point for the high end is around 300, and it can go all the way up to 800 if it's something really, really well executed. Now, what about the expenses? To do such a high level of service, sometimes we have to spend. And we do, but here in Rocio Palace region, there's a very strong benefit that allows the operating expenses to be quite competitive and quite low compared to other properties. And that has to do with the cost of staffing. Staffing is a challenge, especially in big cities like Lisbon. It's a challenge because it is difficult to attract the workforce that is needed for the restaurants, front desks, etc. But here in the region, there's a strong advantage, and that is two sources of talent for Rocio Palace Hotel. One is the School of Hotel and Tourism in Porto Alegre, which is just 20 minutes away, which offers practical degrees that are needed to run a hotel operation, be it front desk, maintenance, gardening, cooking, reception, etc. And another one is the bachelor degree offered by Politécnico de Porto Alegre, which is for a hotel director or operations director. So these two are very substantial sources of talent that can allow an operation like Rocio Palace with a very high standard of service to be also very cost competitive. Now, earlier, I mentioned that the marketing has already started, even though the hotel is still 2 years from opening. It has started so that when we open the hotel, there is already a brand and there is already a latent demand. And it has started by a series of products from the region branded with Rocio Palace. One of them is the olive oil, which you see on the picture in the left. I even have a bottle here with myself. Rocio Palace olive oil is made from olives in the region, not in the property, because the olive mill in the property is not working, but it's made from olives from the region. And also the region has nuts to offer, and because of that, we have also started promoting almonds and walnuts, and these are being distributed to clients in the Nordics, thousands of units every single week to clients in the Nordics, which is the target market. So what about the process? So to sum up, we have an investment of 280 in a deluxe hotel, Nordic designed, in an urban location with the yield that comes from the operations of the hotel, with an exit strategy after the 5 years of the Golden Visa requirements, with the refurbishing starting in 2023 and the operation in 2025. This is, in a nutshell, the investment. As I mentioned, there's also the IMT that is offered as a bonus. And there's one more thing, which is in face of this legislation uncertainty, there is also a protection that if anything changes in the rules that would prevent an investor from getting the reduced Golden Visa, then they would be getting a full refund. So if anything changes in the legislation, even though it's not very likely, if that were to happen, then there is no risk for the investor. There's one thing which is also interesting in this investment, and that is the value of scarcity. Because in this area, in the natural park of Nomad, it's impossible to get anything done. Especially new constructions are forbidden. But anything that needs to be done in that park needs the approval of nothing less than 8 different entities. The entity that is responsible for the conservation of nature, the entity that is responsible for the management of the park, the Institute for Nature Preservation in the whole country, the municipality, the tourism. So all these entities need to approve whatever needs to be done there. Rocio Palace has an advantage, which is the construction is there and it has been licensed. It took more than 2 years to get all the approvals, but now they are there. The construction permit is issued, so it is ready to start construction in the first quarter of next year. But this level of protection in the area gives also security that the area will keep its charm and its attractiveness and will not be spoiled by massive developments because they are just not possible to do by law. So next steps. For those interested in the opportunity, and given that time is of essence here, you can book a virtual coffee meeting with our team and get to know more about the project. Or you can learn more by going into the Rocio Palace Investor portal. If you go to the website, rociopalace.com, under investors, you can access to the portal by receiving a PIN code that will be sent to your email. So as we wrap up the webinar today, we will send a brief email so that you can log in easily to that portal and get all the information so you can learn about the opportunity. And now we will save some time for your questions. Q&A time.
So thank you, Felipe. We have received a lot of good questions, both during the webinar, but also before the webinar. And I'm just going to pick one of them here. So one question is the annual yield contractual? Does the operator guarantee a minimum yield?
The annual yield is, of course, in the contract, in the touristic assignment contract. It's based on the occupancy in the hotel. So it is not guaranteed because it depends on that occupancy. But it is guaranteed that there is a yield paid every year.
All right. And the next question I have here is, this is Andres James. He's asking, the 5-year buyback is meant to be 5 years after the investment is made or 5 years after the start of the hotel operations?
It's 5 years after the investment is done. However, some of the investors may not get their golden visa finalized by then. And that's because there's timing in the process that may not be exactly the 5 years. So there is a period, a grace period. If some investors have not completed their golden visa, then there is a grace period of maximum 2 years for the property to be sold, so that no one would be losing their golden visa because of the sale being done.
The next question is, let me see here. So there's a John Ormesher that shared a few comments. It's about the same topic. It's about the uncertainty of these programs continuing in the future. Is that something we have considered?
Yes, indeed, there is uncertainty, and it's, of course, we don't like that uncertainty as well. I think no one likes that uncertainty. It would be much better if the Prime Minister would just say if he is willing or not to change something in the law, but he hasn't done that. So we have to live with that uncertainty. What we have done to mitigate the uncertainty is put in the contract a clause that if anything changes in the regulation, the investors are allowed to get their full refund. So it's not a breach of contract, it's just a full refund because the legislative environment has changed. As I mentioned, I don't think that it's likely that that change will happen already in the beginning of the year. It's not impossible, but it's very unlikely. However, we will know on the 25th of November, there's the voting, the new budget will be voted and will be enacted in the 1st of January. So there's a little bit more of uncertainty, but in a week or two, we will have much more clarity.
So Khaled Shakshia, he is also asking, does an investor get an actual physical asset like a room in the palace or only shares?
The investor doesn't have a specific room, a specific unit. The investor has a share of the entire property and a share of the entire business. So he is a co-owner in that property and in that business. What they benefit from in terms of usage is they have the right to use 1 week every year in high season or 3 weeks in low season. That they use complimentary, so no charge for that. They can also use that week. If 1 week they want to stay in the palace, in the next week they want to stay in the beach, then they can trade that week with our partner hotels in Algarve Resorts, and they can use that week in another place. So that is also possible. On top of that, the investors also benefit from 25% of discount in any services at the hotel, be it the lodging services, food and beverage, events, etc. So if they want to extend, for example, the week more than the weeks they are entitled, they can do that with a 25% discount.
And then there is a question here about, it's Adrian Curum that is asking, so the question is about all the fees involved in the Golden Visa besides the 280,000. So the fees, you can say the transaction cost. Could you elaborate a bit on that, Philippe?
Sure. There's two types of fees. There's the transaction fees, and then there's the legal fees of submitting the application. So on the transaction side, the legal fee, the fees are the stamp duty of 0.8% and the IMT, the fee on the transaction, which is 6.5%. That's the normal fees in the market. However, in this case of Rocio Palace, the IMT is waived. So the developer is paying the IMTs. Therefore, the investor only has the stamp duty, which is 0.8%. So they don't have the 7.3% that are normal. On the legal side, the legal fees vary because it depends on the lawyers. Some lawyers are more expensive, some lawyers are cheaper. They vary from 5,000 euros to 10,000 euros, all the way to 15,000 euros. So it depends on who they are working with. Sometimes there are agreements. For example, we have an agreement with a law firm because we negotiated in a big volume. We have a little bit more competitive fees, but it's basic down to whoever the investor chose. Those are the fees that are transaction fees and legal fees.
And then there's a question about what happens if the developer goes bankrupt. So what security is there for the investors?
Security for the investors, on the one hand, is the property itself. So they do have the assets. So they are owners of the property. If the contractor, for example, that is refurbishing the property would not be able to fill its contractual obligations, then it would be substituted by another one that could do it. That's actually in the contracts. So if there's a delay in the construction of more than 2 months without any justification, of course, if there's a force majeure, if there's a war, if there's serious impediments, that's one thing. But unless there's a force majeure, then the contractor is in breach of its agreement if there's no physical execution of the construction for more than 2 months. And therefore it can be substituted.
Maybe I'll just complement your answer, Philippe, because I think there's another point that is also quite different from some of the other projects, and that is that in Rocio Palace, you can keep the investment in the rehabilitation in your own Portuguese bank account until the money are needed. So you're able to submit the Golden Visa application by paying for the property, which is a legal act you can enforce by law. And then you have the amount for the rehabilitation, for the works, and that you can keep safe in your own Portuguese bank account. And when you can show you have that amount and that you have paid for the property, you can submit your application.
Yes.
There's another question here. It's Khaled Shakshir that is asking, he's asking a lot of good questions. So what happens if the counterparty could not buy back the real estate? So I think, yeah, do you want to elaborate, Philippe?
Yeah, well, it's of course a matter of timing. The assets is going to be put on the market, and it's a business at the end of the day. It's a property, but it's also a business. It's a hotel operation. And of course, hotel operation, there are years where there's more favorable winds and years where there may be less favorable winds. For example, very hard to sell a hotel in a pandemic, of course, in 2019, 2020, 2021. Now it's the opposite. Now it's booming times for tourism, great time to be selling hotels. So because there's not a fixed deadline where the property needs to be sold by that day, no more extensions, then there is some flexibility to play with the timing. So if the timing is not right in a given year, then there's the possibility to wait for a year more and then execute the sale when the price is the highest. And of course, that the investors keep receiving the yield as long as they are owners in the property.
Maybe just to compliment you on this, so there are some projects out there that offer buyback guarantee. If you read very carefully the clauses in those contracts, you will realize that there's no such thing as a guarantee, because they have a clause, which is an escape clause, that allows them to not fulfill the obligation of buying back if they pay a small fee of 3% for 1 year to the investor. And to give you an idea, that amounts to around 9,000 euros. So of course, that's no buyback guarantee. So it's just important that if someone tells you there's a buyback guarantee, that they can actually document it, because so far there has not been any projects we know of that has been bought back by the developer. And also there has been no projects we have seen where it has actually been legally enforceable. So I just think you need to be critical when you hear things that are maybe too good to be true, because of course there's no guarantees. Everyone will do their best. That's also the case in our project. We don't offer to buy back the property. What we offer is to do a targeted sales strategy where we find the right investors that will maximize the profit for the investors, for the Golden Visa investors. And there's a compensation in the sale. So when after year 5, when the property is sold, then the profit will be split 50-50 between the investor, the Golden Visa investor, and the developer. So there's a strong incentive to maximize the profit for the investors. I'm just going to see some more questions here. There has been a lot of questions coming in just in the last few minutes. So let me see here. Jennifer Dipoyen was asking, is there profit sharing upon sale? And that's precisely the case. That was what the concept I just explained. And or is the return of funds at the level of investment? So we expect to sell at a profit. That is what the exit strategy is about. Let me just take a new question to you, Felipe. So there's some of them that are a little bit redundant here. It says, Rajinda Balaraman, what led you to decide to do this with your life career? Given your McKinsey background, you could have chosen to do any line of work, entrepreneurship. So it's a more personal question.
Yeah. I would say there's 2 reasons. First of all, by training, I am a civil engineer. I've been designing bridges. That was my first job. It was not McKinsey. McKinsey came after. So my first job was to design bridges, and I enjoyed it very much. So I like the physicality of building something that is there, bricks and mortar. In McKinsey, we do a lot of presentations to CEOs, board directors, etc., but there's less materiality in it. So I always like that element. And then the second thing is that I'm Portuguese and I love my country. And of course, that I am passionate for different areas of the country, but in particular, Alentejo has captivated me because of it's a true gem. I have been, originally I'm from the south, I'm from Algarve. Algarve is a very touristy destination. So to me, coming to an area where I can breathe the fresh air and I can be in touch with nature and I can contribute to the heritage, it's very meaningful. And that's what draws me to this project.
So we are running a little bit over time. I'm just going to take the last question. And that is from an anonymous attendee saying, is another investment required after the 5th year exit in order to maintain the Golden Visa residency?
No further investment is needed. Then the investors can have their money back. However, if they would disinvest before the process is completed, then either they would find another investment of the same amount or they would lose their Golden Visa. And that's why those 5 years are very important.
And I'm going to take just a last question, since we also started a little bit late. What is the sum of other fees involved with Golden Visa in addition to the 280,000? I think that one we already covered. Let me find another one. When can we submit our paperwork for visa approval? Immediately after investing? ?
Yes, that's what you mentioned, Mathilde, that when the property purchase price is paid and the money for the construction works is deposited in the investor's bank account, the conditions are met to apply for the Golden Visa.
All right. I think that's all we could manage to include for now, but we are going to send all of you an email with a follow-up and with the answers to all the questions. Also, those that we didn't have time to answer in this session today. And we will also send you an invite to join our investor portal, where you can find more information about the Rocio Palace project. And there's also a Q&A in there, where you can clarify the most common due diligence questions. All right. Thank you for your attention. We really appreciated all the activity and questions coming in. Over to you, Felipe.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. And we'll be in touch. Reach out to us if there's anything else we can help with. Thank you for today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.